You are listening to Despair by Michael Brockbank. Episode 3. Riley's eyes fluttered open as sunlight found its way to his face through the canopy of leaves from the trees towering over him. Birds continued to chirp without a care that someone had invaded their landscape. As the young man lifted his hand to shield his eyes from the sun's intensity, he was shocked to realize that he was in the middle of a dense forest. Turning his head to look around, he didn't recognize the location, and he had spent a great deal of time in the surrounding forest near Master Galen's cabin. These woods were very different. He slowly pulled himself together enough to sit upright. A slight ringing echoed through his ears, and his head felt heavy and sore from the events of the night before. For a moment, every movement seemed to be followed by a wave of dizziness, and every muscle in his body ached. Scanning his new surroundings, Riley began looking for signs of his master, the decomposing stranger, or the werewolf. From what he could tell, he was absolutely alone aside from the birds that continued to chirp in the distance. "Master Galen?" he called out. The sound of his own voice increased the intensity of pain in his head. He thought it would be better to recuperate before attempting to call out again. Riley sat for some time trying to gain his bearings. After a while, the dizziness subsided, but he still found it somewhat difficult to focus his eyes. It felt as though the intensity of light within the forest was almost too much for him to bear. The last time he felt this way, Barnes, one of the farmers who often helped Master Galen, talked him into drinking a pint of something dark in the summer before. The feeling was similar, but this time Riley didn't wake up in a horse trough. The ground he found himself on was rough, with a few patches of grass sporadically sprouting about. A large root from a nearby tree protruded from the ground under his leg, propping him up at an awkward angle and leaning to one side. Aside from the normal trappings of a dense forest, the only thing nearby was the rucksack Master Galen shoved into his chest, and the wand he had pulled out and pointed at the decomposing stranger. Riley pulled the sack close to him, removing the clasp that had cinched it closed. He hesitated on lifting the leather flap which draped over the sack's opening. The student sat there for a second, pondering over whether Master Galen would get upset if Riley started rifling through the contents. "Maybe there's something that could help me," he said to himself, grabbing the flap and lifting it open. At first glance, Riley thought he was still suffering from dizziness. The inside of the sack looked as though it was much larger than its outer surface area would suggest. In fact, there seemed to be quite a bit in the sack that wouldn't normally fit. The student has read about bags of holding like this, though he's never actually seen one. Although his excitement was growing, the cloudiness of his mind, the ringing in his ears, and the soreness of his muscles had taken away a great deal of his enthusiasm. Still, Riley found the sack incredibly fascinating. The first item Riley pulled from the sack was Master Galen's lightstone he often used to ignite his pipe. The student guessed his master must have slipped it into the bag when he pushed the young man through the mirror. It would be quite a useful item should Riley find himself lost in the woods for more than a day. He hated trying to light a fire without external means, and couldn't seem to wrap his mind around the kindle spell Galen tried to teach him. The next item was a small, leather-bound book, which was closed with a leather strap and a clasp. Riley recognized it as a spellbook, but the writing carved into the face was a bit more advanced than what he was learning. However, he was able to make out a few of the words. Perhaps with time he would be able to read the text. Riley pulled the egg-shaped item from the sack. He remembered seeing Master Galen shove it into the rucksack before cinching it closed. Carefully removing the leather wrapping, he revealed an intricately carved stone. It was covered in runes, filled with what appeared to be silver and gold. The writing was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, and had no idea where to begin translating. The surface of the stone egg was smooth except for the base, which appeared rough and cracked. Upon closer examination, Riley could see the stone was broken off of another object. Wrapping the stone with its leathers, a flash of something metallic caught Riley's eye from within the sack. He reached in and removed a sheathed dagger. The hilt was slightly curved, and the guard was a set of small, outstretched wings. A rolled piece of parchment was tied to the hilt. Resting in the sack next to him, the young man untied the parchment to reveal a very brief note. It read, "Narok, listen to him." Riley unsheathed the blade from its holding. It was long and narrow, almost resembling a fang from some metal creature. Examining the weapon closer, The blade itself was laden with a set of runes the student did not recognize. These were unlike those symbols he had found on the stone egg. The dagger itself was unnaturally warm. Resting within the pommel at the base of the hilt was a light blue gem with a black vertical slit which resembled a constricted pupil of a cat's eye. "Are you Nerak?" the student whispered to himself as he examined the blade. Suddenly, the hilt of the blade began to vibrate, and the gem in the pommel illuminated. A flash of light followed, and Riley found himself feeling dizzy as his eyes involuntarily closed. He felt himself falling backward into darkness for the second time. Riley found himself fluttering his eyes open and shielding them from the sunlight with his hand. Again, he was laying on the floor of the forest, almost in the exact same position he was in earlier. The dagger lay next to him on the ground, no longer vibrating nor illuminated. Slowly sitting up from the dirt, he again found his head throbbing.
"It will pass,"
a deep voice spoke. Riley quickly glanced around the area as he picked up the weapon. The pain from his head made it difficult to focus as his eyes squinted, trying to determine who was nearby. Pointing the dagger outward, he managed to get to his feet for the first time since arriving in the forest. He struggled to gain balance and keep himself from falling back onto the ground.
"There's no one there."
"Who are you? Show yourself!" the young man shouted into the trees. Distant birds found offense to their once quiet resting spot and took flight.
"I am Nerak."
Riley looked down at the blade and dropped it to the ground.
"No need to be alarmed, lad. I'm only here to help."